Hello and welcome to another Flightgear tutorial. Today I want to show you how to fly the Concorde model in Flightgear. So I have downloaded a special custom Concorde, which you can see here. So this is not the standard Concorde model that you can download from within the Flightgear menu, but I downloaded this customized and a little bit advanced model from GitHub. And as you can see, it has also different liveries, and the instruments, they look a little bit nicer. They have a 3D look. I will show this to you later. So today I want to perform a little test flight with you from Madeira, Lima Papa Mike Alpha in the Atlantic Ocean, to Amsterdam, Echo Hotel Alpha Mike. And as we're flying to Amsterdam, I chose this beautiful KLM livery, which of course in reality has never existed. So let's go back to the pilot's position. Here you can see this 3D cockpit. It is operated almost exactly like the standard model. There are just some minor differences, and I will later try to point them out for you so that you know what is the difference. So for this custom model, unlike the standard Concorde, once Flightgear has started, the engines are not yet up and running, so we have to start them manually, but it's a very simple procedure. But before we start the engines, we have to do some more preparation work. First of all, we have to manage the fuel, so you go to the standard fuel menu. We use full tanks, although it is not absolutely necessary because the flight from Madeira to Amsterdam is only 1,500 nautical miles. And with completely full tanks under optimal conditions, you could go the double distance, 3,000 miles, to cross the Atlantic. But just to show you the fuel handling and especially the trimming by using the fuel tanks, I will fill them almost completely. The tanks number 9, 10 and 11 are trim tanks, and I will make the front trim tank and the rear number 9 and the rear trim tank number 11 half empty, so that they add up to 100%. Here you see 48% plus 52% adds up to 100%, because in the course of the flight, during our climb, I will have to trim all the trimming fuel from tank number 9, from the front to the rear. So it will all be, the rear tank will be full, the front trim tank will be empty once we're on our cruising flight level. So all the other tanks are full, and I will later explain to you what is the purpose of those different tanks. You see the Concorde has a lot of different tanks. They all serve a specific purpose, but that's for later. So that's in terms of fuel management. Now we want to enter the route from Madeira to Amsterdam in the route manager. We use the standard route manager. So we go to Echo Hotel Alpha Mike. We use no, we don't use any pattern here. We just go from airport to airport. Our cruising speed will be 525 knots in a cruising altitude of flight level 513, and in this altitude, this 525 knots, they equal Mach 2 plus, slightly above Mach 2. We do not want to determine the target runway yet, so we close the route manager and reopen it. And this empties this field for the target runway. We will not decide it now, but later, once we receive the airport and weather information from Amsterdam. So no approach pattern, no stars. And so here, none. And now we should be ready for activation. Activate, and now you see, now the first line has turned from white to orange. Now the route is active. Next thing we want to prepare is our radio stack for VOR navigation, because I want to include a little maneuver at the beginning of our flight to demonstrate to you the capabilities of the autopilot. These are the autopilot buttons, and here on the left the auto throttle buttons, and I will explain during this little maneuver that we're flying, I will explain how those different options are handled. So we go to an initial flight level of 12,000 feet, and this is the altitude where we'll perform these little VOR and heading maneuvers. Let's have a look at this route that we just entered. We're going from Madeira straight to Amsterdam. When I activate the nav ID, so the beacons, you can get an idea what this route is about. This is the contour of Spain and Portugal. This is France, Britain, and here is Amsterdam. And now, to do some VOR maneuvers at the beginning of our flight, I will enter the frequencies of the two nearest beacons, Porto Santo, into the primary VOR radio, 114.9, and I want to approach this VOR in an 80 degrees angle. So I have to do a lot of turning on that VOR radial dial here. I should have prepared this beforehand. Okay, I will turn the mouse wheel as fast as I can to go to a direction of heading 80. And the secondary radio, just for safety reasons, I will enter the frequency of the Madeira Funchal VOR in case we have to fly a go-round, in case of an emergency, if we have to return to our airport, so that we have some good orientation. So 112.2. We don't need to choose a radial for that. It's just for distance. You see? Down here you have the two DME receivers, and they show you the distance. DME number 1 will show the distance to Porto Santo, and DME 2 will show us the distance to our departure airport, more precisely to this VOR here on the Madeira Island from our departure airport. So the idea is the following. We will make a takeoff here on this quite short runway. We have to use a special maneuver to get off this runway, which is in reality too short for a Concorde start, and then go to a northern course heading 360, and then once we intercept this radial of 80 to Porto Santo, we will do a right turn using the autopilot, following the VOR signal, crossing this beacon with a course of 080. After that we go to a northern course again heading 360, and once we intercept our route, which we entered in the route manager, then we will just make the plane follow that route. So first of all, just to be sure, we will go to the route manager and jump to our final destination, which is Amsterdam. So we highlight the second line and go to jump to, and then we will be heading directly for Schiphol and not return to Madeira in case we follow the route. So the next thing, now it's time to start the engines. We go to the overhead panel with Control Oscar, and the starting procedure is very easy. You just flip down those 4 start switches, and then you just press the S button for start, and have a look at the gauges for the 4 engines. There you can see them starting up, and you can also hear them starting up. So let's press the start button and listen. You can see those gauges coming alive. Keep the start button pressed all the time. And when this roaring sound of the engines dies, then you can release the start button. Now your engines are up and running, And this pressing the start button, it also flipped up the 4 start switches again. So let's go to the overhead panel again. With Control O, you return to the pilot's view. Next thing we have to prepare. So there's a lot of preparation work to be done. We press this white button here so that it's light, and it is the takeoff button. It overrides some of the limitations of the plane so that you get more power for the takeoff. Then Q and H, we have to enter the correct air pressure on the Madeira airport into our altimeter. You see now it shows we are below sea level. Of course, this is wrong. So we have a look in the weather report. Madeira 1024 hectopascal. We can use this dial here on the lower left to enter 1024. So that looks better now. We're slightly above sea level. Now, next thing, we fold down this visor here, which is for better aerodynamics in supersonic flight and also for protection against flying objects. So here with this switch on the right, you can first, now we're on top position. When you fold it down one position, then it makes this visor retract, and we go to position number 2, and this folds down the nose in a 5-degree angle, and you can even fold it down deeper to a 12.5 degree angle, and that's for landing only. So we don't do this now. We go to nose position number 2. Instead of flaps, you're operating that nose because this plane does not have flaps or air brakes. You're using the angle of attack of the plane by creating enough lift, for example, on short final when you're very slow. But this plane does not have flaps or air brakes. Instead, you use the nose and the angle of attack of the plane itself. So, what's next in our checklist? Just a little hint about the afterburners. We will not use the afterburners for takeoff, but we have to use them later to get from flight level 300 to flight level 513. So let's go to the overhead panel again. Look down at the thrust levers. These 4 switches here are for to activate the afterburners, but you can also activate all 4 of them pressing Control Foxtrot. I can do that now with a Control Foxtrot. The other 2 will follow accordingly. See? And with Control Foxtrot you can also deactivate it. You hear it with a clicking sound. So we will not use the afterburners now for takeoff because that would be a violation of the noise regulation on the network. Okay. So next thing, to prepare for this northern course, I have to dial a direction of 0 degrees, 360 or 0 degrees here into this heading selector. This is the heading selector if we make the autopilot follow in heading mode. Now, 0 degrees, which means a straight northern course, and later we will turn to direction 80. Okay, so engines are up and running. Our center of gravity of the plane is also within the threshold of these 2 yellow lines. That's also okay for the start. Now, the only thing missing is the parking brake. You deactivate the parking brake as usual with Shift Bravo, and this will make here you have the indicator for the brake pressure, for the hydraulic pressure, and if I press Shift Bravo, then you can see that the hydraulic pressure goes to 0. Now we are free to roll. One final look at my checklist. Yes, it seems we are ready to go. So I will press down both brake pedals and rev up the engines to 40% first to stabilize the 4 engines. Now I go to full thrust and release the brake pedals. This will reduce the runway length that we need, because in fact the runway is a little bit too short. So like with this little trick, we will make it to the end of the runway. Use the rudder to keep the plane on the center line.
Rotate.
So we rotate and take up the gear immediately. I tend to forget that. Gear up, nose up, put the nose up, and the visor also for best aerodynamics, not to create any unnecessary drag. We activate the auto throttle already so that we're not overspeeding. I want the plane to go 250 miles, which is 250 knots, which is the speed limit below 10,000 feet. So we're going for our northern course already. I usually do not activate the autopilot below 3,000 feet, because sometimes when you activate the autopilot, it results in a weird pitch maneuver. It can suddenly pitch down and you don't want to ditch into the ocean. So you should have some safety margin before you activate the autopilot, but we can already prepare the autopilot. We activate the flight director. It's just for information. So we are now descending. This is totally wrong. And we go for heading mode and for heading hold and pitch hold. So let's see, let's turn more to the left to go already on this northern course. We're pitching up too much. This is the stall warning when I'm pitching up too steeply. And now I activate the autopilot. Let's see. Okay, see, it does a very weird pitch maneuver. I deactivate the autopilot again. That's simply too much. Try again. Again, this funny pitch maneuver. Let's have a look. Heading hold, pitch hold. We go on just altitude to go for the new altitude. Let's see if it works now. So that's better now. So instead of a pitch hold, I chose the climb mode, and so the plane starts to climb to 12,000 feet now. So you see, sometimes when you activate the autopilot, it does weird things. Then you better deactivate it and stabilize the plane first, and that's what we did. So let's have a look at the map. So we go for this northern course, we go for heading mode, which makes the plane follow this pre-selected course, 000. And once we are close to this radial for the VOR Porto Santo, we go for VOR lock and make the plane follow this VOR signal. That's something we can do now. The plane should bank to the right and cross this beacon in an 80 degrees angle. So we're already above transition level, so I will change the altimeter to a standard air pressure. This is also something I tend to forget, but not today. So we're on standard air pressure. We are climbing. I choose a vertical speed of 2,000 feet per minute. That's a standard climb rate. Nothing too extreme. And you can see here on the map that the plane is still turning right and it's aligning to the VOR signal, and it will fly perfectly over this beacon. And this beacon, it's located on another little island in the Madeira archipelago. We can have a look when we look from outside with the Victor button. You should already be able to see it. Here are those islands here on the right, because we're not yet aligned. And here on this island, here there is the Porto Santo VOR beacon, and we will be flying over it. So that's all okay for the moment. We are on our standard speed. What I forgot to do was to activate the landing lights here. It's always something missing. But we have to deactivate them again once we're above 10,000 feet. So we can also deactivate the takeoff button. And now that we are flying with the autopilot, I will briefly explain to you how the autopilot and auto throttle works. First, the auto throttle. To activate here, with this dial, you choose the target speed for your auto throttle. It goes in tens. When you click with the mouse button, it increases in one knot intervals, and when you turn with the mouse wheel, it's in 10 knot intervals. To activate the auto throttle, you have to flip up those two slides here, autopilot 1 and 2 at the same time. And to make the plane accelerate to the selected speed, you go on IAS acquired, indicated airspeed acquired. This initiates a speed change. To keep the current speed, you press this IAS hold. It's also going automatically from IAS acquired to IAS hold once you've reached your target speed. And this button on the left, it keeps the current speed in terms of Mach. And here on the right side, you have another button which, from my point of view, belongs not to the autopilot, but the auto throttle. It's max climb. And when you press this, you will see it deactivates these three buttons, max climb, and it makes the plane keep the current climb rate, but using the maximum speed that the plane can go while keeping the climb rate. Okay, this is about the auto throttle. If you want to deactivate it, it's just that easy. You flip down these two auto throttle switches, and then you're on manual thrust lever control. But make sure that you slide back the thrust levers completely and forward to make sure that you are now in control of the speed management. And this is just for safety. So always slide it back completely and forward completely after you have deactivated the auto throttle. And now the autopilot. Let's have a brief look. So we want to keep the current altitude. Let's not ascend anymore at the moment. Now the autopilot. You can use these two flight director switches, so that these two those two yellow needles here are active in your horizon instrument. It's just for indication. It does not really control the plane, the flight director. Then to activate the autopilot, you flip up one of these two slides, not both at the same time. It doesn't work. It's a backup. The second autopilot is just for backup. You cannot activate them both at the same time. Today we will be only using autopilot number 1. Then you have different options what the autopilot can do. This first button makes the plane follow the route that you entered in the route manager. It's INS, it's inertial navigation. It makes the plane just follow this route, meaning this purple line here. Back beam is not a switch, it's just a light, so it shows you once you have crossed a beacon or an ILS station that you have left it behind. Then it shows you you're behind your target. You have left your target behind. Track heading means make the plane follow the heading that you have selected here in this heading selector. VOR lock is what we're currently doing. We are following a VOR signal. The VOR signal, which equals the frequency that we have dialed in our primary navigation radio. We want to go, what we in fact want to do, now that we have crossed the beacon, we want to go on our northern course, 000, so I press track heading, and the plane should bank to the left to follow this course that I entered, 000 or 360. So we're going to the left. Heading hold, that's self-explaining. When you press this button, the plane will just keep the current heading. It's a stabilizer mode. Turbulence is to dampen the autopilot's input in case of turbulence. Pitch hold is to keep the current pitch angle. Go around is again not a switch but just an indicator light. It indicates that the board computer has initiated a go around maneuver in case of a failed landing approach. Landing is once you have intercepted an ILS signal and you are aligned with that signal, you press the landing button to prepare the autopilot for the landing maneuver. Mach hold, it's the same as here on the left side. It's in fact an auto throttle option rather than an autopilot option. It's to make the plane keep the current Mach speed. Glide, it's for the glide slope when you're on an ILS signal to make the plane follow this 3 degrees descent angle of the glide slope. Max climb, I explained before, when you press this button the plane will choose the maximum speed that still enables it to keep the current climb rate. Max cruise is again not a button but only an indicator. It tells you when you're on your maximum cruising speed. IAS hold, it's the same button here as here on the left. It's to keep the current speed in knots. As we are okay, we will keep this low speed of 250 for the moment. Then altitude hold, that's very simple. You find it in other planes as well. It's just to keep the current altitude. Altitude acquired on the lower right side. It's to initiate a flight level change. In Boeing airplanes, this button is called flight level change, and it makes the plane ascend or descend to the flight level that you've entered here in this altitude selector. And vertical speed, when you press this, it makes the plane follow the vertical speed that you have selected here in this instrument. Here you have this white triangle. It now points to 2000 feet per minute, and you can control this white triangle with this slide here on the right of the central pedestal. You see, when I turn this with the mouse wheel, I can roll up and down this white triangle, and then the red triangle, which shows your current climb rate, it will align with the white triangle when you press this vertical speed option. And now just one final hint before we go on. Now we will follow just our route that is in the route manager. I go on inertial navigation, and the plane should bank to the right then. Bank to the right to follow this purple line all the way down to Amsterdam. Just one final hint for this altitude selector. As with the speed selector, when you turn the mouse wheel, when you keep the mouse pointer over this wheel and you turn the mouse wheel, it changes the altitude in thousands, and when you click with the mouse button, it changes in terms of hundreds. So we will go to our next intermediate altitude, that's 30,000. So I press this mouse button until I'm on the thousands, and then I turn the mouse wheel until I have selected 30,000 feet, flight level 300, and then I do the flight level change, and I want a higher climb rate. This is just 800, this is too low. We want at least 2000 feet per minute. Later we will choose an even higher climb rate once we have activated the afterburners when we're above flight level 300. Okay, this was our little autopilot and auto throttle tutorial, and our little interim maneuver is finished. Now we're just flying straight as the crow flies to Amsterdam. So we don't need this map anymore. Now comes the next speciality of so as we are above 10,000, I will retract the lights, these exterior lights. And now another thing that you have to do when you're flying the Concorde, you have to do trimming with the fuel tanks. So you will spend a lot of time on the engineer's position with Control Echo. You go to the engineer's position, and what you have to do is you have to keep this white line, the center of gravity of your plane, between those two yellow thresholds. And these two yellow thresholds, they're not static, they will move as we climb and as we change the speed of the plane. So they will spread out and they will move up and down. And your main task as an engineer is to keep this white indicator between them. By the way, one more thing that I forgot. As an engineer, you have another duty. After the takeoff, you have to flip this switch up, which makes the engine number 4 go from 88% capacity to full capacity. That's what we do now. I forgot to do it right after the takeoff, but it's good enough if I do it now. So, what do we want to do? We have to constantly keep this white indicator between the two yellow thresholds. And this is something you do primarily by cross-feeding fuel between this front trim tank number 9 and the rear trim tank number 11. I will show you later how you use those different valves to do the cross-feed. But first of all, we have another front trim tank number 10, and this I will not cross-feed, but I will sort of cross-feed, but I want to burn the fuel which is in it, which leads to a very constant and slow trimming, aft trimming of the plane. So I open the outlet valves of trim tank number 10, and I open the inlet valves of the two main tanks number 5 and 7. And this will now slowly empty this trim tank number 10, and this fuel will be burned in the engines. So let's have a brief look. What is our altitude? It seems all okay. Okay, we're too slow. The next thing we have to do, as we are above flight level 100, we can now make the plane accelerate. So we go to the maximum that this instrument allows, 400 knots, and do a speed change with this button here. So now the plane should at the same time climb and accelerate. I use the standard HUD with the H button to see if that really happens. No, we're slowing down in fact. So I will reduce the pitch. Now we should accelerate. This is always our target when we're on the climb to our cruise level. We want to accelerate and at the same time climb. That's okay. So I will postpone this little fuel trimming tutorial for later, because now it is more important that we get the speed and climb management done correctly. Otherwise we will not reach our target flight level and speed. What I can do already, normally I only do this after above flight level 300, but I can activate the afterburners, and then I can choose a much higher climb rate. Where this climb rate is too low, and we are also quite slow. So I will activate the afterburners. Here are the 4 afterburner switches. I press Control Foxtrot. This activates 2 of them first, and then the other 2 come alive as well. And now we are accelerating quite strongly, and I can also pitch up. And I always have to balance. I want to climb and accelerate at the same time. So we can choose a quite steep pitch angle. 4,000 feet per minute is okay. So we are climbing very rapidly and at the same time accelerating, because we are lagging behind in terms of speed. We are behind our speed schedule. We should be much faster already. Okay, I will pitch down a little so that we are accelerating faster. Let's have a look from outside. Here you can see our 4 afterburners in full action here. These 4 beams, these are the afterburners in action. So that's stable at the moment. Let's have a brief look at our fuel management. We want to slowly empty the front trim tank number 10. We want to trim the plane aft, so to the rear. And that works pretty well at the moment. You see those 2 thresholds, they have spread significantly. And we are always, our task is to always keep the white line between the 2 yellow lines. Okay, we want to go to a higher level, to our target flight level of 513. Click the mouse button 3 times, 1, 2, 3, to go to these 300 as well. So now the climb rate is too low. I activate the HUD again. And here we now go on max climb. Max climb. This deactivates the original settings here in the auto throttle, and now the plane will start to accelerate. Okay, that's okay for the moment. I want a higher climb rate. I go to 2000. Let's see if that does. Okay, and now we have to do some trim work here. You see, now that these 2 thresholds they have decreased a lot, now we have to trim from the front to the rear. So that's something I will do here. I stop the draining of trim tank number 10, and now I will cross-feed fuel from trim tank number 9 in the front. I open the outlet valves, and I open the inlet valves of the rear trim tank number 11, and that will cross-feed fuel from the front to the rear trim tank. And later, when we're descending the plane towards Amsterdam, we have to do the opposite. We have to open the outlet valves of trim tank number 11 and those inlet valves here on the top of trim tank number 9 to trim the plane forward. You see? We're going into the correct direction. This white line is now descending. We also open the fuel menu. It's just for me as a reminder. First I want to see if there's really some crossfeed going on between number 9 and number 11. That is the case. We want to fill the rear trim tank and empty the front trim tank. And I use it as a reminder that there is fuel trimming going on in the back of the plane, so that I don't forget it when I go back to the pilot seat. So let's check. We can pitch down a little to make the plane accelerate even more. $1,500 should do. So now you hear this beeping alarm. We caused it because we were out of balance. So the center of gravity was out of the yellow threshold, but now we're back in the correct zone again. So now we can deactivate the alarm and rearm the alarm with this lower button. Now it is armed again, and if we leave the threshold again in terms of balance, then you will hear the alarm again. So we're not really speeding up, but I want the plane still to accelerate. So when you're above 30,000 feet, you have to successively lower the pitch angle of the plane, because this is a critical area where we are breaking the sound barrier. We have broken the sound barrier. We are now at a Mach speed of 1.12. Our target Mach speed is 2 plus, slightly above Mach 2. So I will pitch down even more. And now you see I have to stop the crossfeed, because we are now at this. We are now at the lower threshold. We can keep it that way for the moment, because I think this trend will go on, and we press this black round update button here to feed the new fuel data into the board computer. This is for update. Always when you do trimming, press this black round button for update. Okay, we are fully trimmed to the rear now. I think we can keep it that way for the moment. We are now very much trimmed to the rear, but we are still not out of bounds. It's still okay. I think it will stabilize in our favor. So we pitch down even more. We go with a very low climb rate of even below 1000 feet per minute because we want to accelerate. Even with those strong afterburners, in this altitude it is difficult to at the same time climb and accelerate. Later, once we're above 40,000 feet, then we can pitch up again, because then the plane, as we're in very thin air, the plane will then more easily accelerate again. You see, we're speeding up, that's okay. We need at least a speed of 400 knots now in this altitude. Otherwise we're in risk of not reaching our target speed of Mach 2 plus. Just a little side comment. Here, in this instrument, you can see the distance to your next checkpoint in the route manager. So let's have a look. In the route manager, our next checkpoint is our final destination, the Schiphol Amsterdam airport, and the distance is 1,350 miles. So you don't have to exclusively rely on the DME information, which comes via radio. You can also use this GPS-based distance information here in this instrument, which relies on the targets that you have selected in the route manager. It's very comfortable. Now just a brief overview of the different instruments. As I said, here you have the two DME indicators. You see we are now 125 miles away from our destination, Madeira. This is the angle of attack. This is the angle of attack here. No, this here is the G meter. Here we are now at G1, so it's just standard. We are not having any centrifugal force at the moment. And this is the angle of attack, that's 0 degrees. So this is both standard at the moment. Here you have your VOR and ADF indicator to the beacons. This is lateral forces that are on the plane. Here this is your VOR instrument, where you can see visualize VOR signals and also enter the angle. Ground speed in knots, your horizon as usual. It will also give you information when you are landing in terms of glide slope and stuff. Your airspeed in knots, here with an indicator, with an analog indicator, and with a digital dial here. Your speed in Mach, that comes very handy once we reach our target speed of Mach 2. Your altimeter in feet. You can choose the air pressure here as usual with this dial. You have two instruments for vertical speed. Once this dial here shows you your vertical speed, your climb rate, and also here on this scale you can also see your vertical speed. I prefer to use this one. I find it more convenient, more precise. And with this dial here on the right, you can choose the target vertical speed with this white triangle. So I will pitch up, because now we're accelerating quite nicely. I go to 1500. You see, I go to 1500 feet per minute, and the red indicator, which shows your current climb rate, it's following accordingly when you're in vertical speed mode. No, I was on max climb here. I wanted to go on max climb. So our target speed is 525 knots. And in an altitude of flight level 513, this equals Mach 2 plus, a little bit above Mach 2. I suggest when you're approaching your target speed and altitude, you use the standard Flightgear HUD. It is very helpful to show you if the trend is going into the correct direction. If you're actually accelerating and also climbing at the same time. This instrument is very, very helpful, at least for me. Now we have to do a little bit more of trim work. We are still within the threshold, but not optimal. Let's have a look at the details. There's still a little bit of fuel left in tank number 9, so we will burn this fuel now by cross-feeding it into the main tanks. I feed it into the main tanks number 5 and 7, and from there it will be burnt in the engines. So I want to empty the trim tank number 9 completely. We will refill number 9 later again. Once we're descending, we will refill it from the fuel quantity in the rear trim tank number 11. Okay, now number 9 is empty. And we will also burn the fuel in the trim tank number 10 completely, so that we're completely trimmed aft to the rear. You see, we're a little bit trimmed to the front, but we want to fully trim to the rear once we're on our target flight level. And press the update button. Okay, that's it for the moment. And one more thing, once you've reached your target flight level 513, you go to the overhead panel and flip down these 4 switches here from climb to cruise. We should not forget that that stabilizes the engine power in high altitude once you have reached your cruising flight level. This is something we will do in a couple of minutes. One more hint, if you're unable to acquire your planned speed of Mach 2 or your target flight level, it might be that you have forgotten to fold up the visor here, and this deteriorates your aerodynamics a lot. So if you forget that, you will not reach Mach 2. Now we have come into a typical situation for the Concorde. As now the load on the afterburners is too low, they start oscillating. You can also have a look from outside what that looks like. They are turned on and off, on and off. Of course, that's not something we want. It's very stressful for the engines. You can prevent this in 2 ways. Either you just shut down the afterburners, but that makes it difficult to climb and accelerate at the same time, or you can simply pitch up. This increases the load on the engines, and it will stop this oscillating effect. I pitch up to absolute maximum, and that should stop this oscillation. If it does not, then there's only one more option you have. It's to stop the afterburners. So now, you see, it has stabilized now. The oscillation has stopped. Otherwise, if it does not stop, you simply has to press Control Foxtrot to deactivate the afterburners. We are now approaching our target altitude of 513. The plane already reacts to this new situation. We are close to 513 and it is pitching down at the moment. We just wait for it to stabilize by itself. No need to do take drastic action now. I will now deactivate the afterburners. Go with a low pitch angle, with a low climb rate to try to go to our target flight level. This is always the most tricky part of the flight, apart from the landing. It's this final tuning to really stabilize on your planned cruising flight level. This is where things get very touchy. You have to find a very delicate aerodynamic balance here. Let's have a look at our speed in Mach. We are right at Mach 2, so that would be okay for cruising. It could be a little bit more, and we still want to, first of all, I will now keep the current altitude to stabilize the plane for a moment. And once this is done, we can try to climb again for those final 1000 feet that are missing. Okay, now we're on level, and now we try to climb those final 1000 feet. With a very low climb rate. Oh, that looks very nice. Okay, perfect. Yeah, you see, it's not yet perfect. The plane is still adjusting. Sometimes it does some weird pitch maneuver in this altitude, and then you should not try to change the speed, because depending on your altitude and your climb rate, then your speed could go up and down. But don't worry, the balance between altitude and speed is now okay. So just wait for the plane to recover from these sudden maneuvers by itself. Normally it stabilizes just by itself. You just have to monitor things, not to let them get out of control. So we stop the burning of the fuel of tank number 10 because it's empty anyway. We close the valves to clean up everything, update the values, and this is it in terms of trimming. And now, as I told you, we have to change the engine rating from climb to cruise. We go to the overhead panel with Ctrl O and flip down these 4 switches from climb to cruise. And this should now stabilize the plane for the next couple of hours while we're on our cruising flight level and speed. So Oscar to go back to the pilot's seat, look from outside, and looks all good. Now we also don't need the HUD anymore. This is it. Now we are perfectly stabilized. It's flight level 513, Mach 2.0. Now it's all okay, and now we can relax and have a cup of coffee for the next couple of hours until we are 300 miles away. Because we are so fast and so high, you need to initiate your descent much earlier than with a normal passenger plane. You have to get busy at least when you are 300 miles away from your destination. So pay good attention to your mileage here on this GPS receiver. So I will shortly end this first part of the tutorial. If you're interested in how to do the total fuel management here in terms of cross-feeding and activating those 2 reserve tanks, then please have a look at part 2, which I will soon also publish on YouTube. And now just one final hint before I sign out. Such a long flight over thousands of kilometers or miles across the Atlantic can be very boring now. And to shorten the time, of course, you can use a cheat. You can use the time settings and time compression, something I will do now. But you have to be aware of the limits. You can use a time compression of 2. That's fairly safe. The maximum that you can use is 4. And there you still have to pay attention if the plane starts doing weird maneuvers. Never do a simulation rate of 8 or higher, because that would lead to instability of the whole simulation. The plane would start swinging, oscillating in terms of speed and altitude, and in the end it will crash. So 4 times time compression is the maximum that you can go for longer distances. I know this from my tests and experience. So now we're flying on our route towards Amsterdam with, in fact, not Mach 2 but Mach 8 with this time compression cheat. So this is it for the moment. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I see you again in part 2 of the Concorde tutorial. Have a nice time. Goodbye.